My name is Nancy Smith-Lee. I'm the director of the Center for Active Transportation at Clean Air Partnership. And we're so pleased to be hosting this special webinar today with two international experts, Dr. John Pucher and Dr. Ralph Buehler, on what it takes to make cities better for cycling. And for those of you who were here on Tuesday, we do again apologize for those technical difficulties, and really so much appreciate you joining us today. And for those of you who were here today and weren't here Tuesday, welcome to you as well. And thanks to everyone for your flexibility in the rescheduling for today. So just a little bit about who we are. We are the Center for Active Transportation. We're a project of Clean Air Partnership, which is an environmental charity that since 2000 has worked to enable communities to improve air quality, advance active transportation, and take bold climate action. So TCAT's mission is to advance knowledge and evidence to build support for safe and inclusive streets for walking and cycling. Everything we do at TCAT stems from our firm belief that improving the environment for walking and cycling is good for our city, the environment, the economy, and public health. So now I'm really so pleased to introduce you to our speakers. This is actually the fourth time in over 15 years that I've had the pleasure of organizing an event featuring John Pucher and Ralph Buehler. So I dug into the archives to find these photos. On the right is Dr. Ralph Buehler, our professor and chair of urban affairs at Virginia Tech. This is taken from a photo from TCAT Spike Summit 2009. And on the left is Dr. John Pucher, Professor Emeritus in Urban Planning and Policy at Rutgers University, delivering a keynote presentation at TCAT's Complete Streets Forum 2014. So welcome back to you both. So Dr. Pucher and Dr. Buehler's international comparative research on cycling has been and continues to be hugely influential and groundbreaking in establishing a knowledge base for understanding the uptake of cycling in different communities around the globe and in documenting what's possible. So you're in for a real treat today as you hear from these editors of a new book called Cycling for Sustainable Cities. The book covers a wide range of topics, including why it's so important to build our cities for cyclists, and what are some best practices for doing so, and how to ensure the process incorporates equity and social justice. So just a couple of general housekeeping remarks before we get going. Please make sure you enter your questions into the Q&A and we'll keep track of them, and John and Ralph will address as many as possible at the end. Their presentation will be about 45 minutes, leaving about 10 minutes for questions. And while we'll do our best to wrap up the webinar within an hour, our presenters are very enthusiastic, so it might go a little over. So we're really pleased that John and Ralph have agreed to stay with us until 1:30 in the event that we need some extra time to adequately address all the questions. But if you need to, please do feel free to exit right at 1 o'clock, and you can catch up on whatever you missed in the recording that will be shared with you following the webinar. So over to you, John and Ralph.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Both Ralph and I would like to thank Nancy Smith-Lee and the Center for Active Transportation for inviting us to give this presentation. We also thank TCAT and its affiliated governmental and non-governmental organizations for all they've been doing to promote safe and convenient cycling in Canada. And we'd also like to thank every one of you out there listening and watching this webinar. Without you, we wouldn't be giving it. So thank you very, very much. You're to making cities safer and friendlier to cycling. Just a few words about me, John Pucher. Almost all of my research over the past 4 decades has involved international comparisons of urban transportation, and that helps explain the international scope of our new book. I really have always been convinced we can learn a lot from other people, but also from other countries about how to improve urban transportation here in North America, especially when it comes to public transportation, walking, and of course, cycling, the topic of our new book. It was my 3 years on sabbatical as visiting professor at the University of Münster, Germany, about an hour from the Netherlands, And by the way, in this city, 40% of all trips are by bike, and it's 250,000 people, so it's not a tiny town. And my 3 years on sabbatical there is what inspired my love of cycling and motivated my cycling research of the past 25 years, and especially motivated my interest in how you get everyone cycling. Because in Munster, it was everyone I saw cycling. It was older adults, it was children, it was the women, even more women than men. So that really, really inspired me. How do you make cycling possible, safe, and feasible for everyone? Now over to Ralph.
Yeah, thank you for attending this webinar for me as well. My name is Ralph Buehler. I'm professor and chair of urban affairs and planning at Virginia Tech. I study determinants of travel behavior. So what determines if people walk, ride a bike, ride public transport, or drive, and then what the implications are of these decisions for the environment, the economy, and for equity. Most of my work is also international comparative, because I believe that different cities and countries can learn from each other. And now that gets us already to our book and the talk today, which is titled Cycling for Sustainable Cities, as our book is. And the main theme is how to make cycling safe and convenient for everyone, as John already said. And on the title slide here, you can already see some of these measures, how we can make cycling safe and convenient for everyone, for all groups of society, using different types of bikeway infrastructure, integrating bicycling with public transportation, and other measures we're going to talk about today. Before I get started, I want to emphasize that this is not a book alone that John and I did, but it's a book that relied on over 40 experts from 5 continents. So a truly global effort, also in different disciplines, people with backgrounds in planning and engineering and geography and public health. And we're fortunate to bring them in to help us put together this book. The cover of the book already shows you what cycling for everyone and true mass cycling looks like. We see people dressed in everyday clothes. We see men and women. We see normal bicycles. We see special cargo bicycles. It's a picture from the Netherlands. And of course, this is not a special event. This is just cycling there. And if you look very closely on the right-hand side, you will see the green light for bicycles, which is also important for our cover. The next couple of slides, I briefly take you through the book, what's in it, because we cannot cover everything in our talk, and then we'll really dive into. So we start with an introduction where John and I set the scene, also with international comparisons of cycling levels. Then we have a couple of chapters on specific topics, one on cycling and health, the next on the important topic of cycling and safety, and then on how to design bikeway infrastructure for everyone. An important topic of bike parking, because bicycles are not only moving, they're also parked a lot of the time. And then one chapter that doesn't look at the infrastructure, but at programs and policies that help promote cycling. The next chapter looks at how can we make decisions on which bicycle projects to implement and how to evaluate different projects. The next 2 focus on technology and bicycling, e-bikes in Europe and North America, and on bike sharing and the ongoing evolution of it. The next chapters then focus on specific groups of cyclists, or often groups that are underrepresented among cyclists. So women and cycling, children and cycling, and then older adults and bicycling. And this group of chapters is sort of rounded out by a chapter that focuses on the social justice and cycling overall. This is then followed by case studies, starting with case studies on cycling in China and India, the 2 most populous countries in the world, truly important for bicycling, followed by a chapter on cycling trends in Latin America, and then a chapter comparing cycling in large cities, New York, London, and Paris. The next are 2 cities that are true bicycling cities in Europe, with a long history of it, in Copenhagen and Amsterdam, followed by 2 sort of newcomers to bicycling that didn't have a cycling history, Portland, Oregon, and Seville in Spain. The second to the last chapter looks at bicycling advocacy, which is very important to promote bicycling and make bike infrastructure and bike programs happen for everyone. And then in the end, John and I summarize, bring it all together, and give an outlook for the future.
Well, the concept of sustainability is extremely important in every single chapter of our book. There is not one single chapter that doesn't deal with one or two or maybe 4 or 5 different aspects of sustainability. And there are, in fact, a number of different perspectives in terms of what is sustainable. A lot of people think of primarily environmental sustainability, and there's just no question that bicycling is just about the most environmentally friendly means of transportation in cities that is imaginable. Virtually no pollution at all, and very little in the way of non-renewable resources used. And even if you go to talk about e-bikes, certainly an e-bike has much, much less environmental impact than an e-car would, and even much less, dramatically less than, say, a gasoline-powered car. It's also sustainable, cycling is sustainable from an economic point of view, both personally and from a societal point of view. We have very low private costs. Buying a bike, repairing the bike, it doesn't cost a whole lot. You can pay thousands and thousands of dollars for a fancy bike, but it's not necessary. You can get a good bike for $300, $400, $500. And you just use your own energy. You don't have to go to the gas pump to fill it up, thank goodness. Public costs are also low compared to building a road. We're talking about 1/100th of the cost. Putting in a bike lane, even a protected bike lane, or an off-road greenway costs something like 1/100th, or a very small fraction of the cost of building infrastructure for cars. And it also costs, by the way, much, much less than public transportation. Nothing against public transportation, but cycling is really, in that sense, even more sustainable economically than public transit. And the other aspect of economic sustainability, that the improved health from cycling, a point that we'll deal with again just below, it does save on health costs, medical costs, both for individuals and for society. So in that sense, it's economically sustainable, that is cycling. Probably the aspect of sustainability that is least considered by most people is social sustainability, which means a lot of different things. But for one thing, it's equitable. That is socially just, it's financially affordable for almost everyone because it costs so little, both in buying the bike and using the bike. It's physically possible for most people. And I know that in certain cases, people have certain disabilities and simply can't ride a bike, but that's a fairly small percentage, and even people with certain disabilities. So for example, I'm 70 years old. I have arthritis, fairly serious actually, in both knees, both hips, and in my back. And every single specialist I've gone to has told me cycling is the absolute best thing I can do. It's fun, so that's really why I do it. But I can bike 20, 25 miles a day with zero pain during or afterwards. And the doctors tell me that's the best thing I can do. So even for people with arthritis in certain cases, which is, I guess, a kind of a physical disability, cycling is the best option. Less pressure on the joints and so forth. The one thing that's really important, there's a whole chapter written by 4 professors, world famous, by the way, professors of public health, all of them in Australia, which documents the physical, mental, and social health benefits of cycling specifically. The physical health benefits are probably the most obvious. You think, okay, you're getting exercise, and everyone knows it's good to have physical activity. So that's sort of a no-brainer. But what surprises people more is the mental and social health benefits from physical activity. And I was really astounded. There's entire large sections of that chapter on the health benefits of cycling, dealing with many studies that document unquestionably the really important mental and social health benefits from physical and social health benefits. Meaning, for example, when I get out, I get to see lots of people, whether I'm cycling in the neighborhood or on the greenway. I've really made a lot of friends and met a lot of people, or you could cycle with your friends on the greenway or whatever. There's all sorts of things, but it really is an important form of social health. It gets you outside and in contact with other people. So in short, the benefits of cycling are immense, so great that I would say cycling is divine. Ralph's advancing the slide because I'm talking too much. But this is a picture I took while I was on sabbatical in the mid-1980s, the first time in Münster, Germany. And this is the way nuns got around, but it's also the way everyone got around. That's the way police got around, mail was delivered, everyone got around this way. Well, given that cycling is so divine and so perfect in every way, you might wonder, why is it that there's so little cycling in English-speaking countries? Another problem with the English language, by the way. And if you look here to the left, those are all English-speaking countries. Yes, even England, 1.7%. What's shown here is the percentage of trips, of all trips that are made by bike in each of these countries. In those the countries to the left, it's like 1 to 2%. It's very, very small. By the way, Ireland is also about 2%, so it's also very, very, very low. Then you cross the channel over to the continent, and you find much, much higher levels of cycling. The highest being in the Netherlands, and no big surprise, almost a third of trips, 28%. Denmark at 14%, and then this is obviously not a European country, but Japan is 13%. And in Tokyo, by the way, it's 17%. So really quite high levels of cycling in Japan. And some of you might think, well, okay, maybe it's because average trip distances are so much longer in the United States than they are in, say, Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands. But that is only partly an explanation. It is true that average trip distances are somewhat longer within urban areas in the United States than they are in Germany, Denmark, and others. But what this graphic does, it controls for trip distance. It's saying within each trip distance category, what is the percentage of trips made by bike? Well, look at this. Even in the category to 10 kilometers. Here you have in Germany, 8%, in Denmark, 29%, in the Netherlands, 23%. In the United States, less than 0.4%, and in the UK, 1.4%. So even controlling, even within each trip distance category, Americans and also Brits make a tiny percentage of their trips by bike. And something that's really important to note here, there's no excuse for it. I get really I'll go back, Ralph. I want to show this. There's just no excuse for it because all the travel surveys in the United States show that 40% of all trips in American metropolitan areas are 2 miles or shorter. That's a trip distance that's easily by bike. Okay, next slide. Now, there's some good news. So the previous slide showed some bad news about North America, Australia, and the UK. But the good news is that the bike share of trips has been increasing in very large cities in all of these areas. As you can see, big increases, and actually the biggest increases have been, the percentage increases have been in cities where you had very low levels of cycling to begin with. And so you can see in that bracket, Toronto fits in there. So it went from 0.8% in 1996 to 2.8% in 2017. That's progress. But there's also been an increase then in cities that had a very high level, beginning level of cycling, or relatively high level. So you have big increases in Berlin, Munich, and in the two sort of star cycling cities in Europe, Copenhagen and Amsterdam. They already had high levels of cycling, and they managed over the past 20 years or so to further dramatically increase. We look at Amsterdam. That's a big jump. Almost a doubling in the percentage trips by bike in Amsterdam, which had a high level to begin with. And in terms of my previous comment, that the largest percentage increases have been in cities without a cycling tradition. And you can see that, so they're on the right-hand side are all those cities: New York, Buenos Aires, Bogota, Sevilla, Spain is also an example of a city that had no cycling culture at all. Chicago, Paris, none of them. And London also didn't have any. But look at Toronto, that's just sort of a 3.5-fold increase in cycling. Those of you in the Toronto area, may say, well, there's just not nearly enough cycling. And you're right. But let's look at the positive side. At least there's been this 3.5-fold increase over the past 20 years, and hoping that that just continues and continues. And as we'll talk about later, things don't happen overnight. So we have to be a little bit patient. But in Europe, the increases in cycling have taken decades, and it's going to take a few more decades here in North America as well. Okay.
And we saw a quick shift in travel behavior due to the COVID crisis in the last year, still ongoing. And even though it's not part of the book, we did a recent paper looking at the impacts of COVID on cycling. And this shows you bike counters counting cyclists in various countries, comparing 2020 with COVID to 2019 prior to COVID. If the colorful lines are above the zero, it's here in the center, we have more cycling in 2020 compared to 2019. If we're below, we have less cycling. Overall, we are above the line, so there was more cycling in 2020. We also see, of course, these big dips here around the week 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 of the year. This is in March, April, when we had the big lockdowns, and people were not allowed, especially in European countries, not allowed to leave their home, could only leave their home with a specific destination in mind, or were limited to a certain radius around their home. And once these lockdowns were lifted, we had increases in cycling levels again. So overall, the findings of this study were that during COVID in 2020 compared to 2019, we saw increases in cycling volumes and in cycling shares of trips. The percentage of trips increased often more than the cycling volumes because driving and especially public transport usage dropped so much. So the number of bike trips, or the share of bike trips as a percentage, increased. There was a lot of variation by month, by time of day, by location, and by trip purpose. In these trends, in general, there were increases for exercise, recreation, getting outdoors, and relief of stress during COVID. There were increases in afternoon cycling and early evening cycling for people to get out and ride their bikes. The largest increases we saw in the data were in weekend cycling. And also, if we look at the type of facility, the largest increases were on off-road recreational paths. There were decreases in the morning peak hour. That's mainly because many people did not go to work anymore, they didn't go to school, they didn't go to university. So the morning peak of cyclists, commuter cyclists, is missing. Overall, we saw a decrease in utilitarian cycling, again related also to the lack of commuting. And we saw the decreases we already saw during lockdowns. The couple of studies we looked at saw sharp increases, especially in Paris. We looked at when the lockdowns were lifted, sharp increases in cycling. It was not only the travel behavior that changed, it was also the cities that changed streets and places to be more bike friendly, more accessible for bikes. This is the Rue de Rivoli in Paris, which used to be a car only street, which is now almost bike only street entirely, with tons of cyclists using it. On the left hand side, you can see still sort of buses on the lane sneaking through. In Canada and in Montreal, they installed 68 kilometers of new or improved cycling facilities in 2020, mostly with a very high standard with the physical separation, as we see here. And they feel so safe that you have entire families riding their bikes. All over the US, Europe, also Canada and Toronto, local municipalities changed the use of street spaces during COVID. This included outdoor dining, new bike lanes put in, car lanes being narrowed or number of car lanes being reduced, entire roadways that were closed off for cars and given over to the use of bicyclists and pedestrians, shared streets in neighborhoods where through traffic was discouraged. Low speeds were enforced, and cyclists and joggers and cars could share the road, as we see here in Boston and in Chicago. In many places, these transitions sort of were made permanent during the crisis or after the crisis. This is Boylston Street in Boston. Before, in July 2020, they then put in a temporary pop-up bike lane with these bollards there between July and October. It was very popular and many cyclists used it. And then it was turned into a cycle track, protected bike lane starting in October 2020.
And permanent.
And permanent. Similar example here, the other side of Canada from you in In Vancouver, this is Beach Avenue that was used by over 10,000 cyclists on several days in the summer. You see the cones that are put up there to close it off from traffic. And then was later then converted to a protected bike lane with a concrete curb, and it remains one of Vancouver's busiest cycling routes, and again, turning something into a permanent facility. Similarly here, 4 miles of MLK Drive in Philadelphia were closed to motor vehicle traffic and have been closed since March 2020, with huge increases in cycling and 5,500 to 6,000 daily bike trips on average weekdays. Again, something that has been kept in place. A little bit closer to home for you, Lakeshore Boulevard in Toronto, not permanent, but it attracts up to 18,000 cyclists on summer weekends and is popular for bike riding.
One thing I just wanted to mention, and that is we realize that many of the measures that we showed there during the COVID crisis have also been introduced in Toronto, but we wanted to show you examples from other cities. So now to Latin America. There had been, prior to our book, almost no published research on cycling in Latin America. And we wanted to fill that gap. So we found 3 professors who are experts in the area of cycling in Latin America. They are all 3 from South America, and all 3 professors of transportation and really experts in this area. There are no national travel survey countries in Latin America, and so you're really forced to look at city data. And one of the South American authors happens to be the guru of cycling data in all of both South America and Central America. And these are the latest figures that were available. And you can see there's a huge variation. On the one hand, you have Bogota and Guadalajara at 7%, 8% of trips by bike. And then at the other end, you have Valparaiso and Quito and Lima, which are actually very big cities, and you have less than 1%, far less actually, the 1% of trips by bike. So really huge variation. The good news here is that there's been an increase in levels of cycling in almost every one of these cities, especially over the last 10 or 15 years. And lots of things are being done in all of these cities, almost all of them, to increase cycling in the future, but there's a long way to go. So we're very pleased that these 3 South American authors shared this information with us in this chapter, because Latin America has 680 million people, not a continent to ignore. Well, as Ralph mentioned earlier, we also introduced for the first time a chapter on cycling in China and India, the 2 most populous countries, and definitely countries with together, they have more bicycle trips and more bicyclists than any other countries combined, all the countries combined, the rest of the world. Okay, here's China. And I had 3 Chinese colleagues who helped me with this chapter. And you can see, maybe you can't see so well, there's no national travel survey for China either, so you're limited to city data, and the city travel surveys are not necessarily comparable, but this is the only data available, the best we could do. Overall, unfortunately, the trend is downward for cycling. It's not a big surprise, but for most of these cities, the percentage by bike has rather dramatically over the past 20, 30 years. The decline is even sharper than what you can see in this graph, because some of these cities include e-bikes in the bicycles. And in China, unlike North America and Europe, e-bikes, what is classified officially as e-bikes, are essentially electric scooters. They have no pedal at all. So it's even a sharper decline than this, but still, we're talking about maybe overall something like 20% of trips are by bike, maybe 25% overall in China, still a fairly high level. Why this huge decline in cycling in China? No, big, truly dramatic increase in per capita income, greater affluence, which has led to a humongous increase in ownership among Chinese households. So that has detracted, it has taken away some of the bike trips. But in addition to that, maybe equally important or even more important, and that is massive, truly massive increases, expansions, improvements in public transportation systems, especially metro systems. I think something like 6 of the 10 largest metro systems in the world are now in Chinese cities. So that's another reason, vast improvement in public transit, both actually rail transit as well as bus transit. That's taken a lot of the bicyclists away as well. One other reason is cities, these large Chinese cities have vastly increased in population and in land area. That has increased average travel distance, and the longer the trip, the less likely it is you're going to be able to make it by bike. So there are a lot of explanatory factors explaining this, but the central Chinese government, which, as you probably know, has a lot of power, would like to turn this trend around. They also see cycling as being a very sustainable mode of transportation, and they've been experiencing, as you well know from the news, lots of acts of climate change, flooding, and all sorts of problems, drought and whatever. And so the central government has sent out a directive to all these cities saying, you got to turn around this trend and we will give you money to do it. So now they are building new cycling facilities, improving old cycling facilities, and shifting more of the street space back to bicyclists. So there is some hope in China. In India, there is lots of cycling. It is out for the country as a whole, with roughly 1.4 billion people. About 20%, almost the same now as in China, about 20% of trips by bike, a little bit higher in rural areas, which might surprise some of you, 22% in rural areas, 18% in urban areas. If you look at city size, there's almost no change. It's still 20%, 20 in the size of 100,000 and 2 million. Then as cities get bigger, so from 2 to 5 million, it goes down to 16%. 5 million plus, it goes down to 9%. So what happens is, as the city gets very big and becomes a mega city in particular, the trip distances become so much longer that you have a much smaller percentage of trips by bike. So, and among the largest cities, there's lots of variation. So there wasn't all that much. It's good, actually, we saw it by city category size. Looking at the largest cities in India, and these are the largest by population size, huge variation. Just look at Mumbai compared to Kolkata. So you have, and the Mumbai, Delhi, and Kolkata are the 3 largest metro areas, all mega cities. But you see in Kolkata, 10 times the percentage of trips by bikes there compared to Mumbai. Why? Well, so we asked everybody, and 3 Indian colleagues who helped me out with this. And it turns out that average per capita income in Kolkata is much lower. The percentage of the population in poverty is much higher, whereas in Mumbai, which is the financial capital of India, per capita income is much higher. So that would be one explanation, that because of lower incomes in Kolkata, you bicycle use because it's cheaper, and you have less in Mumbai where affluence is greater. The other issue is Mumbai has the very best public transportation system in all of India. So somewhat similar to the situation in those Chinese cities, that the public transportation offers an attractive alternative to cycling. And that's one reason also that you have less cycling in Mumbai. Kolkata has a terrible, really awful public transportation system. So because the public transit is so bad, more people are likely to bike. There's one last reason for this difference, and that is the land use pattern. In Kolkata, it's a more contiguous land use pattern, and it's sort of a grid street pattern. It's a finely meshed or grid pattern, which is very good, very conducive to cycling. You're not on huge arterials. In Mumbai, it's more like on a peninsula, long peninsula. Trips tend to be much longer with very, very busy arterials. Yet another reason that there's less cycling in Mumbai. So anyway, along the larger cities, there are variations, but as you can see, overall, you have about 20% of trips by bike.
If we want to promote bicycling, we have to promote it for everyone. And this looks at the age, and we can really cycle at any age. As you can see here, you can start cycling at a very young age, and you can cycle into older age. We may need some special bicycles at certain ages with 3 wheels, but that can even help us carry things. And of course, we can cycle for different trip purposes. We can also go out riding for recreation, and we can ride our bikes for utilitarian purposes. When we looked at cycling by age for different countries, we see that in all countries, the highest share of trips by bicycle is for the age group that's not at driving age yet. For every country, the first bar here is the highest. These are people that are not at driving age yet. Once you're at driving age, cycling drops, but it doesn't drop all the way throughout for all countries. It drops for the US and for Canada, going down from very low levels to even lower levels as age increases. However, if we look at Japan, Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands, we see that after this initial drop, cycling levels are fairly stable even into older age. So 12% of trips by those 70 plus years old in Japan are made by bicycle, 10% in Germany, 10% in Denmark, and in the Netherlands, almost 1/4 of trips by those older than 70 are made by bicycle. We compare that to less than 1% of trips, actually less than 0.5% of trips in the US, and almost 1% of trips in the UK. So much more cycling for people at older ages in Japan, Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands. Similarly, we see stark differences in the percentage of bike trips made by women. Again, what John mentioned before, the English-speaking countries, so Australia, the UK, the US, and Canada, only 1/4 to 1/3 of bike trips are made by women, which compares to about 50% or even more than 50% of trips in Denmark, the Netherlands, and Japan made by women. So we can design bicycle systems, we can have bike cultures where over 50% of bike trips are made by women, as it's the case in Denmark and the Netherlands. Another chapter in the book looks at the growth in e-bikes, and this growth has only continued since the book has been published. This data is from 2014 to 2018. In all of the countries, the sales of e-bikes are going up. Germany is leading, but the Netherlands is also increasing sharply, as are the other countries. And during COVID, we saw an additional push towards more e-bikes. And there are different types of e-bikes. John talked a little bit already about the pedelecs. These are electric bicycles where you only get assist when you pedal. There, of course, are also the e-bikes that John also mentioned in China mainly, but they also exist to some extent here, where you only have a throttle. You don't even have to pedal anymore. Among the e-bikes, there are also different groups of speed. Some are sort of capped around 20 miles per hour or 30 kilometers per hour. And then the faster class of e-bikes goes 28 miles per hour or 45 kilometers per hour. But the point is, the trend is towards increase in sales and use of e-bikes.
Safety is probably the most important factor in getting people on bikes. When surveys are done where they ask people, why don't you bicycle? The answer is almost always, I don't feel safe. It's just not safe to get on a bike. So improving cycling safety is absolutely crucial if you want to get more people cycling, and especially if you want to get a broader segment of society cycling. It's especially important for people like me. So I'm risk averse. And I think I'm not the only one out there who's risk averse, but I am risk averse. I'm also an older adult. So I'm a little bit more vulnerable in the case of a crash. So cycling safety has always been important for me. It's also extremely important when you ask many surveys done. And every survey says women are much more sensitive to cycling safety than men are. So if you want to get more women on bikes, you need to make cycling safer. It's also true if you want to get parents to allow their kids to go on bike to school or just around the neighborhood, you've got to make cycling safer. And this is true for really anyone with any kind who's risk averse or has disabilities and people who are older who need longer to make decisions and avoid dangerous situations. And I think that the greater safety of cycling in the Netherlands, Denmark, and helps explain two things: why you have such higher levels of cycling there overall, and even more importantly, why you have so many women cycling, so many older adults, and so many children cycling. And here you see there's a very important relationship between, in fact, levels of cycling overall and cycling safety. Part of this is a concept known as safety in numbers. And you can see there's a very strong relationship. In the United States, unfortunately, we have not only the least cycling of the countries shown, we also have the least safe or the most unsafe cycling of any of the countries in this diagram. The Netherlands, on the other hand, has the highest level of cycling and the safest cycling. And of course, you can see Denmark and Germany are actually quite safe as well by comparison. And then you have all these other countries in between. So there's two different directions that this happens, this takes place. On the one hand, when you make cycling safer through all sorts of measures we'll be talking about now, through infrastructure measures, programs, restricting motorists, reducing speeds of motorists, and so forth, you make cycling safer. And because it's safer, more people get on bikes, and especially those yet now on less represented groups. But it goes in the other direction as well. The more cycling you have, the safer cycling is, because cyclists become more visible to the motorist. And it is often, the more cyclists there are, and the more likely it is that a motorist is also a cyclist. In the Netherlands, it is almost inconceivable. I would say 95% of motorists are also cyclists. And so they sympathize then with the needs of cyclists. They watch out for cyclists. It really does go in both directions, but it's crucial. The point is safety is crucial in respect. There is some good news that I can show you, and some bad news too. But if you look at the most recent 20 years, especially at the UK, even the UK, but also in Germany, Denmark, Netherlands, you have considerable increases in cycling safety. So what you have here is fatality rates per 100 million kilometers cycled. So you're controlling, you're standardizing for the amount of cycling that's done, number of kilometers. So this is definitely comparable. You're not talking about comparing apples and oranges. It's the number of fatalities essentially per kilometer. And you can see here two things. That in the UK, but especially in Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands, cycling is much, much, much safer than it is in the United States. If you take Netherlands, so currently we have roughly 0.9 or 1.0 in those three countries, so like Germany, Netherlands, Denmark. So that's 6 times safer per kilometer cycled than in the United States, which is up there at 6. So that's one issue. It's also, you can see that it's 4 times, if I'm correctly, 4 times as dangerous in the United States as it is in the UK. That's really coming for the United States, if it's even more dangerous than the UK. But the other 2 points that are made, these countries individually, for 4 of the 5, UK, Germany, Denmark, Netherlands, you have a considerable improvement in cycling safety. So look at Germany. You have a double safety period. In Denmark, you have more than a doubling in cycling safety. In the Netherlands, you have, I'm not sure what that would be, 67%, 60 or 70% increase in cycling safety. I guess you could only get so safe. But anyway, big improvements. But look at the United States. From the last 2 periods, we go up. That is, cycling has become more dangerous, going from 4.5 fatalities per 100 million kilometers up to 6. Why is this happening in the United States? Well, there's a number of reasons, and we did an exhaustive review of why. One is a massive increase in SUVs, pickup trucks, and minivans, much larger vehicles. And in fact, each of those categories, so pickup trucks getting bigger and bigger and more powerful, SUVs getting bigger and more powerful, and minivans as well. And all of the studies show that the bigger the vehicle, the greater the danger for cyclists. So this big increase in larger sort of light trucks as personal vehicles. So by the way, now 75% of all personal vehicles purchased are light trucks, not sedans. There's another reason, as many studies show, that most American motorists exceed the speed limit. No matter what it is, a higher percentage of Americans exceed the speed limit than is true in any of these 4 European countries. In addition to that, to make things even worse, average speed limits, legal American cities, are much higher than they are in the UK, Germany, Denmark, Netherlands. So not only are the speed limits higher in the United States, that Americans don't even stick to those speed limits, they exceed even those, and there's very little enforcement, by the way. There's another reason, and that is driving under the influence. Levels of drunk driving, or as the British say, drink driving, are much worse, much higher in the United States than they are in these other countries. And that's in spite of the fact that the allowed level of alcohol in the blood, I guess that's whatever you call that, the percentage, is higher. The legal limit is higher, and yet we exceed that legal limit, that higher legal limit, even more than in the European countries. The other is distracted driving, and that's a huge issue. All of the people texting, using their cell phones, very complicated dashboards these days, everything impacting drivers. And that is a much, much more serious issue in the United States than it is in these European countries, where, in fact, texting and phones is very strictly prohibited, and it's really enforced. So it's a very unfortunate trend in the US, and we really have to work on correcting that. We did have a whole chapter on New York, Paris, and London. None of these 3 very large cities, and very influential and important cities, are cities with a tradition of cycling. None of them. I mean, there was almost no cycling in New York or in Paris back in 1990, and very, very little in London, about 1%. Well, all 3 of these cities have invested massively now over the past 20 years, 15 years in particular, in improving cycling facilities, in trying to connect the cycling facilities, make the cycling facilities more separated, physically separated from the roadway and from motor vehicles. And you can see that you have a significant, I mean, there's still low levels compared to Denmark or the Netherlands or Germany, but you see a big increase. So you have almost a 4-fold increase in New York, you have a doubling in London, and Paris is the winner. They speak French and not English, thank goodness, that must be the reason. But you have a 12-fold increase in Paris, and Paris has really knocked itself out in terms of vastly improving their cycling infrastructure, as well as traffic calming of their neighborhoods, lowering speed limits, and every other conceivable technique. The result of all of this is the result as well as the cause. Again, you have it goes in both directions, but you have more cycling and you have safer cycling. So again, you have this correlation between the two. You can see that in every single one of these 3 cities, cycling has become safer. Not safe enough, but safer. So you look at whether it's fatalities or serious injuries, you have a decline in both of those in every single one of those cities. But again, Paris is the winner. If you compare Paris to any of the other cities, it has half, a third. If you look at fatalities, for example, 3 versus 12, 4 times as safe as it is in New York. So the good news is, as cycling has increased, it's also become safer and vice versa. And this is an example of the measures. It's one type of measure. And it's now the focus actually of cycling infrastructure in these 3 cities. And that is physically separated cycling infrastructure. In every single one of these cities, you can see in London and Paris and New York, that's what people want. Certainly it's what women want. It's what parents want for their kids. It's what older adults want. It's what anyone wants. And especially in cities with high levels of traffic, not only is it safer, it's less stressful. And that's really important. I mean, totally aside from the safety itself, which of course is crucial, you don't want a stressful cycling environment because there are people who just don't want that. They're not going to bike unless it's a relatively comfortable, stress-free or low-stress kind of environment. Well, this shows you just that this is what's working. This kind of a policy, this is the infrastructure people want, and it's what's going to get people on bikes.
So how do we encourage more cycling while improving the safety? And John already alluded to the better cycling facilities, but there are many other measures as well, like traffic calming of residential neighborhoods, so cyclists can share the roadway with cars, mixed use zoning and improved urban design to make roadways safer, but also to keep trip distances short enough to be made by bike, integrating cycling with public transportation, and of course restricting motor vehicle use by reducing the speed and reducing the volume, improved education both for motorists and for cyclists about the rules of the road, enforcement of regulations relating to cycling, and special events and promotional campaigns to increase cycling. This graph shows you the growth in the kilometers of cycling facilities in various countries in North America, Europe, and Latin America over the last 20 years or so. And then second, the growth in cycling they experienced. So they all expanded their bikeway infrastructure. They all experienced growth in cycling. There's great variability there, often related to how much cycling infrastructure they had before, how much cycling they had before, etc. And then what they all have in common is they all reduced the fatalities and severe injuries, or the injury rates, relative to the cycling levels. Cycling has gotten safer in all of these cities. One of the key measures, as John already said, was putting in bike lanes and protected bike lanes. This is the growth of protected bike lanes in the US from 2006 to 2018, a very strong 14-fold increase. And this has only accelerated and continued to the day now, but in the book we end at 2018. What do these facilities look like? Here are a couple of pictures. The upper left, we have Copenhagen, where if you squint and see at the back here, the cycle track is typically up on a little curb separated from motor vehicle traffic. And again, there's another curb separating the cyclists from the pedestrians. Through intersections, they're using this blue color to alert drivers and carry cyclists through the intersections. On the upper right, we have Bogota in Colombia, a two-way cycle track there, using these caps here to separate cyclists from or protect them from motorized traffic. On the lower left, pretty familiar to all of you, Montreal, the first city in North America to have a whole network of cycle tracks, here protecting cyclists from motorized traffic with a little concrete curb, as we see it here on the left. And here on the lower right, we have Seville in Spain. They are using a fence here to protect the two-way cycle track from motorized traffic. So there's a picture from Toronto here, where you have a raised bike lane with a curb on the right-hand side, again, sort of a cycle track in a Copenhagen style, but on the other side, you have a regular bike lane going in the other direction. More examples of these protected facilities, this time from Sydney and Brisbane in Australia, again, separating the bidirectional cycle tracks, in this case, from traffic here with a curb and some greenery and parked cars. The upper left, we already see an important feature for bikeway networks, and they are bridges. Bridges for bikes are often the only way to cross rivers or to cross highways. If there wouldn't be separate bike bridges or accommodation for cyclists on bridges, they would not be able to cross these barriers. A new trend we see in many countries are bicycle expressways. They are in cities, but also connecting the hinterlands to the city. Typically, a bicycle expressway is separated from motorized traffic. It also separates cyclists from pedestrians. And importantly, at intersections with roadways, there's either a bridge or there is an underpass, sort of speeding up cyclists because you don't have to wait at a light. And importantly, increasing the safety because you're not crossing the intersection with motorized traffic at grade. We see here on the left, this is in Freiburg, Germany, their expressway network, and they're using the symbol of the German Autobahn, which is sort of famous for unlimited high-speed car travel. They're using the same symbol for bikeways there. In the center, we see an example from Beijing in China, sort of part of the initiative that John talked about to bring back bicycling. It's elevated to have cyclists sort of above car traffic, crossing different roadways and separating them from motorized traffic. And then on the right, we see two other applications from Germany. They're more complicated to build in cities because you need to change the infrastructure to build bridges or to build underpasses. But many cities are connecting the hinterlands directly to downtown using these these bicycle expressways. It's an important new trend in many countries. In the US, we have mainly shared use paths where cyclists share with pedestrians, as on the lower right in Boston. But we also have some separation, as on the Midtown Greenway on the upper right in Minneapolis. And then the Cherry Creek Trail in Denver has sections where cyclists are separated from pedestrians as well. This is a newer application in Chicago at the Lakefront Trail, separating pedestrians and cyclists with over 100,000 users on typical summer weekends, and a very nice location, very prominent there in downtown. Very important, as I mentioned before, this is again in Chicago, are these bridges, or here's a flyover to connect segments of the bikeway network across dangerous and difficult intersections here at Grand and Illinois avenues. Again, an image here from Chicago, a protected bike lane on Milwaukee Avenue, the busiest cycling street there. A new trend is to go away from just focusing on the links of a network, but also to look at the nodes, at the intersections. And this is a Dutch style import. This is from Salt Lake City in Utah, and this is sort of a Dutch style protected intersection. I'll quickly take you through it, how they work. So if a motor vehicle starts here, gets a green light, wants to make a right-hand turn, they have installed these safety islands. What the safety island does is it forces the vehicle to travel longer before making the turn, changing the turning radius, slowing down the vehicle. So if there were to be a crash with a cyclist coming here, the crash would be at a lower speed, not as severe, or it could be avoided because you have a lower speed. In addition, traveling out into the intersection further allows the motorist to more likely see the cyclist and avoid a crash. In addition, the crossing distance here for the cyclist across the car travel lanes is shorter because of the safety island, so less danger there. And then these protected intersections also allow cyclists to either continue straight or to make a two-way turn by starting to queue here, waiting for the green light, and then making a left-hand turn. This shows you what a full-grown bike path and lane network can look like in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. If you look closely, you see red color, that's the existing, and you see orange colors, that's the plan for the future. But you see that almost all roadways that have higher speed cars or lower or higher volumes have bike paths or bike lanes. In addition, you have shared use roadways where cyclists can share with motorized traffic at lower speed all throughout the city. And keep in mind that Amsterdam is not the best cycling city in the Netherlands. In fact, Dutch people will tell you that Amsterdam is quite bad compared to other smaller Dutch cities that have much better bikeway networks and much higher cycling levels. And also keep in mind that Amsterdam was not always that way. And we brought you a couple of pictures of how European cities over decades have changed their transport networks to become more bike friendly. The first one is here an example from Amsterdam. You see the street on the left in 1971. It's a street that's for cars and for trucks. The cars are even parked on the sidewalks. So it's definitely a car street, not for cyclists and not for pedestrians, even though they are squeezing through there. On the right, you see the same street in 2020. It's a street that's for bicycles and for pedestrians. There's bike parking now on the side, still enough space for the pedestrians, and a lot of bicycle traffic in the center. So an effort was made to ban cars from the area and to turn this over to cyclists. Similarly, an example from a smaller town, about 70,000 inhabitants in southwestern Germany. In 1953, we see this intersection here. We have a trolley running through on the right. We have some cyclists and we have some cars, and we have a fountain here that you have to remember. Then came, as in most Western countries, a time of urban renewal, away with the old orientation towards the car and modern things. And that's what they did to this intersection. There's the fountain. The old building was destroyed. A new modern building was built. The trolley lines are still there. You can see the tracks here, but the trolley is not running anymore. And it's a place that's for automobiles. And in fact, the city thought this is so great. We got this from a postcard. The city produced a postcard in 1972 to show, look, we're the new modern car-oriented city. Ironically, the little boy here on the left almost gets hit by this Porsche they somehow situated in this picture to show how great car travel can be in the city. But then again, the city's changed and recognized the detrimental effect of all the car traffic in the city. And today, there's the fountain, the sort of ugly-ish modern building is still there. It looks a little bit nicer, but it's an intersection. The trolley is still gone, but it's for pedestrians and cyclists to share. Again, the city changed the use of this space over time twice, once orienting fully towards cars and now orienting back towards pedestrians and cyclists. And we have one more of these. That's the German city of Freiburg, about 230,000 inhabitants. Again, in the 1950s, we have a trolley running on a bridge here. We have some cars driving, and then the city made the decision to abandon the trolley line. And by 1960, this is a car bridge. The car is the mode of the future. That's where we go. Again, due to the oil embargoes and the environmental crises in the 1970s and protests about traffic lack of safety with so many cars, the city retooled. And today, this is a bridge for bicyclists. Again, policy decisions made at the city level determine what mode of transport gets to use this bridge and what mode of transport gets to be more convenient. Again, staying in this vein of showing changes over time, the graph here shows you how the cities of Portland, Oregon and Seville, Spain, both without a cycling culture in the 1990s before they started promoting cycling, how they changed their bikeway network over time. On the top, we see the bikeway network in black of Portland, Oregon in 1990. In the yellowish color, we see the bike commuting levels. And as you'll see over time, as more red and brown it gets, the more cycling there will be. In Seville, Spain, at the bottom in 2005, we see the bikeway network, which are just these couple of green lines there. By 2000, in Portland, Oregon, you see how much the bikeway network has expanded, and you also see how the colors start to get more intensely orange and red, so bike commuting has increased. In Seville, you see there was a government elected with the purpose of building a cycle track network. You see how much the cycling network increased in just 3 years. They started building out very fast a cycle track network, so a picture of it before. And again, the last picture in the sequence in Portland, you see how dense the bikeway network has gotten and how bike commuting has really increased over time. And you see on the lower right in Seville, how over time their bikeway network has gotten denser and increased even more. Again, changes over time, policy decisions that made cycling more convenient, more attractive over time.
Well, we've shown many examples of different types of cycling infrastructure, protected bike lanes and bridges and so forth. But one of the most important ways to encourage cycling as well as walking is by traffic calming our residential neighborhoods. That is, reducing car speeds in residential neighborhoods, motor vehicle speeds, period, and also prohibiting through traffic. And the reason for doing this is the car speeds are absolutely crucial. The higher the car speed, the more likely that a pedestrian or cyclist will be killed in a crash with a motor vehicle. And it's dramatic, it's exponential. And the 30 kilometers an hour is sort of the inflection point. That once motor vehicle speeds increase beyond 30 kilometers an hour, you have a very dramatic increase in the likelihood of the pedestrian or cyclist getting killed in a crash with a motor vehicle. And so 30 kilometers an hour has become sort of the standard speed for traffic calming residential neighborhoods. And there are many ways to do this. One, obviously, you put in signs, say, by law, maximum speed 30 kilometers an hour, that sort of, and then you have to enforce it, of course, which is really important. If you have a law and you don't enforce it, it doesn't have much effect. So first of all, the law that it's 30 kilometers an hour or less. But then I don't trust cars and I don't count on police to enforce this. So I think it's really important also to introduce the physical infrastructure measures that force cars to slow down whether they want to or not. One is you narrow roadways, that is the part of the roads for cars. Sometimes you introduce zigzag routing, they're called chicanes. You can raise intersections and crosswalks, that slows down the cars. You can introduce traffic circles that can help reduce the speed of motor vehicles, speed humps, speed bumps, and I think there's even something else. I can't remember what they're called. But anyway, but speed humps and bumps are sort of traditional in the United States. We don't do too much of the other stuff. Mid-block closures and artificial dead ends. I'll explain what that is in just a second. Bulb outs at intersections and crosswalks with sidewalk widening. And actually Ralph's slide with the example of Salt Lake City. And by the way, that was Google satellite picture. It really exists. That's I showed actually some examples of that. Now let's go to some examples. So this is a very typical example of traffic calming of a residential neighborhood in any German city. This is really very typical of what it looks like. So the way you do it is you narrow the roadway, especially the entrance to each of these residential streets. So there's really only room for one car to enter or go in either of these directions. And you can see that you have bike parking or benches or shrubbery or trees or whatever you want. And then you post the 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limit. So that narrowing of the streets, every study shows the narrower the street, the slower the motor traffic goes. And this is, I'd say 50 to 80% of all residential streets in German and Dutch cities are traffic calmed in this way. So this is not some isolated example. This is very, very common. If only Toronto and the suburbs of Toronto would have this sort of traffic calming. Now some examples from Quebec. You have in Montreal and Quebec City, these are called diverters, or these are also kinds of artificial that prevent through traffic. That's what it's important. They absolutely prevent through traffic in residential neighborhoods, but they have cut throughs or pass throughs for cyclists. And that's me on the bottom, by the way. I guess that's in Montreal. One example of a traffic calming measure, mainly to or make it just physically impossible through traffic. Here's another example of an artificial dead end, and it really is an artificial end. So you can see this used to be just a wide street, and none of those barriers were there. And what they found is there were a lot of, I think it's called rat racing or whatever it is, avoiding the main streets and coming through the residential neighborhoods. And there were too many kids, actually, too many children were killed by that sort of rat running by motor vehicles. So they just said, that's it. We're going to get rid of the through traffic. So this is an example from Melbourne in Australia. This is maybe the most important slide of all, in that this is a suburban area of around Freiburg. So this is not a center of a city. This is very, very typical of new suburban development in all German cities. This is what it looks like. And on these streets, the speed limit is kilometers per hour. So it's really super traffic calm. It's in English, I think it's called a home zone or a play street. This is the standard. And there's no special infrastructure necessary for cycling, because this is a totally shared street. And by law, the pedestrian and the cyclist have right-of-way over the motor vehicles. So the motor vehicles must drive in a way that avoids endangering pedestrians and cyclists, as well as kids playing on the street. You can see that sign. That is the sign for a super traffic calm residential neighborhood, or a home zone. In fact, in German, they're called Spielstraßen, which is a play street. And lots and lots of these home zones are then embedded within otherwise traffic calm neighborhoods. And I mean, this is a friend of mine, you see he was on the bike, but he and I were taking a 50-kilometer bike ride exclusively in the suburbs of Freiburg, and everywhere we went, this is what we saw. And then on arterials, on every single arterial, there was a protected bike lane on street or a parallel off-street bike path. There was not one single foot, I guess meter, where we felt endangered. It was a very convenient and low stress, nice bike ride. American cities, I'm not sure how this is going, I think in Canada as well, is this a new trend where they're called now neighborhood greenways. And this is an example from Chicago. Greenways are there, it's it's putting together different kinds of infrastructure. In some cases, there's explicitly a bike lane. In some cases, it's a home zone or a very traffic calm street. You'll note that on this particular street, they reduced the speed limit, if you can look at it, up to the lower right at 20 miles an hour, which is roughly 30 kilometers an hour. So they reduce the speed limit basically to traffic calm speed, traffic calming in residential neighborhoods. And then they then brand it. This is a greenway. And so it provides a crucial connection, by the way. It's parallel to a much busier street that would be much more stressful and more dangerous for cyclists, but it's only 1 block away. So it provides a very nice alternative. And this is another trend, as traffic calming, but introducing also a kind of bike boulevard kind of thing. Next slide.
This shows you how traffic calming measures can also accommodate cyclists. We have these speed lumps. I think that's the word John was looking for before. The humps, bumps, and lumps. These are speed lumps, and the bike lane here is sort of between the 2 of these speed lumps, allowing cyclists to go, to not be deflected vertically, but to go through straight, while cars have to go over these speed lumps. Starting to wrap up here, but very briefly, there are many, many other policies that help promote cycling. One of them is bike transit integration, and the other one is, of course, bike parking. Bike transit integration typically takes the form of either allowing bikes on vehicles, for example, on buses, as we see in the upper right. And I think in the US, something like 80% or 85% of all buses now have these bike racks in front to take the bike with you. Or on the lower left, I think that's in Vancouver on a SkyTrain, where you can take bikes on the vehicles, but in many cities it's restricted to the off-peak times. The second way of bike transit integration is allowing bicycles to park at public transport stations and stops. On the upper left, we have the bike parking garage in Washington, DC at Union Station. In the center left, we have a bike parking garage in Freiburg, Germany. And then the center right, we have the bike parking garage in Groningen in the Netherlands at the main train stations. Some of these bike parking garages can be for pay, like we see on the left in Freiburg, but they provide weather protection and they provide protection from bike theft. A more advanced type of bike parking we can see in Nagoya, Japan, on the lower right, where you're sort of entering your bicycle in a bike parking machine or a robot. The machine takes your bike in, goes either up or down, depending on how it works, puts your bike away, and with a code, you can retrieve your bike. It just takes a minute for your bike to come back. More typical bike parking would be in the center bottom there in Portland, Oregon, where they took out car parking spots, 2 car parking spots made for 20 bicycle parking spots, so-called bike corral, and many businesses are demanding bike corrals there because they have so many cyclists, and that you can have more cyclists parked in front of your store than you can have cars parked there. Very quickly, other measures on programs. One is ciclovías. These are street closures, sort of invented in Latin America, street closures for certain hours, certain days, certain weeks, where the roadway is sort of turned over to cyclists, pedestrians, roller skaters, etc., but not to motorized traffic, giving people a sense of what the space could be like if it could be used not for moving or storing vehicles. Bike sharing has been very successful in attracting different groups of cyclists, particularly those who don't want to care about the maintenance of their bikes, who don't want to worry about the theft, because once you dock it in, it's the bike company's problem, and those who don't have space in their apartments to store bikes or have stairs to go up, don't want to carry the bikes up there. Many companies and cities have events like bike to work days and other programs to encourage school children or to encourage workers to cycle to work at a certain day and then hopefully like it, have a good experience and keep doing it over time. As I just said before, it happens also for bike to school days to entice children to cycle to school. Bike training is important. It can be for children in schools in the Netherlands, Denmark, and Germany. All children in 3rd or 4th grade have bike training in schools. In the US, Washington, DC has implemented that now. Many others have voluntary bike training, but also bike training courses for adults, especially in countries with low levels of cycling. Many adults may not have ridden for many years, and training courses can give them more confidence and remind them of the rules of the road and techniques on how to ride a bike. At the other end, it's of course important to train motorists and tell them what the rules of the road are how to behave around cyclists and pedestrians, where they have to yield for cyclists and pedestrians. It's very important to include motorist training, the rights of the road for cyclists and pedestrians. And then last, many cities have implemented a thing called a bicycle account, or biannual bike surveys or bike information. So where they survey cyclists about the conditions of bikeways, about their desires for new bikeways or cycling safety, etc. They're also tracking safety statistics. They're taking tracking data on bikeway infrastructure, etc. And they use this to guide policy and see how they achieve policy goals.
We've shown you a wide range of programs and policies and infrastructure measures, but implementation, political implementation, getting politicians on board, getting the public on board is crucial. Academics, professional engineers, and planners can have the best ideas in the world. If you don't get them politically implemented, they're worthless. So we got to convince politicians in the media and the public in general that these things make sense, that it's worthwhile promoting cycling. How do you do this? First of all, I'd just like to note, all of Chapter 19, which is about Portland and Sevilla, is about how those two implemented those pro-bike measures that led to their expansion, increases in cycling, and the vast expansion of their cycling network. And the last half of the conclusions chapter is completely dedicated to the political implementation of cycling programs and policies. So one way you can do it is publicize both the individual and societal benefits. It's fine. Say, it's great for the environment, reduces greenhouse gas emissions and so forth and so on, increases safety, but also then emphasize for the individual the health benefits, physical, social, and also mental. Include citizens. Citizen participation is crucial. People have to feel like they're involved in the decision-making of what kinds of facilities get built and where, and what programs are introduced, and how all of these things, they don't want to feel left having a policy or an infrastructure measure imposed on them. And by the way, traffic calming of residential neighborhoods, 100% grassroots in Europe and in the United States. It's not something that the government itself imposed. Citizens insisted on it once kids were getting killed by motor vehicles. Implement controversial policy stages and have trial programs. And Ralph showed you that a number of these examples here with COVID. For example, in Boston, on Boylston Street, first you have nothing, then you have sort of a temporary protected bike lane, and then you make it a permanent protected bike. Same thing in Vancouver and many, many examples around the world. That's the way you do things that are controversial, in stages. See what works, and if it works, fine, implement it permanently. Have long-range bike plans, update them. And the other thing is combine both the incentives for cycling, which we've been talking about, with the disincentives for car use, including residential traffic calming, reducing car speeds, reducing parking for cars, increasing the cost of parking, increasing the tax on gasoline. There's many, many things that you can do to discourage car use, and certainly don't let them go through residential neighborhoods. Also, you might not like politicians, but they're important. You have to convince politicians that these policies make sense and that they have widespread public support. You need the media on your side, and you need to have lots of alliances with different groups that are in favor of sustainability, livable cities, social justice, and so forth. Integrate national, state, and local bike advocacy, and this is already taking place. It's definitely integrated here in the United States, and I think in Canada, at least at the state level, the different states in Canada, or provinces, I'm sorry, are doing a good job. There's limited national advocacy, but I think that's growing right now. And then, as Ralph mentioned, benchmarking success over time. Last slide, I really will be quick here. Cycling infrastructure is crucial. The other thing is you have to combine that, however, with lots of different measures, some of them restricting car use, some of them, one really, really important one that gets so ignored here in North America is residential traffic calming. I think that is every bit as important as putting in protected bike lanes. traffic calm all residential neighborhoods, and I can guarantee you levels of cycling will double and triple almost overnight, and safety will also vastly improve. Cycling should be for everyone, which emphasizes here the importance of equity and social justice in cycling policies. We need to develop infrastructure, build infrastructure that is really comfortable, feasible, convenient, safe for everybody, that encourages everyone to get on a bike, and not just those young men on racing bikes who feel super duper trained to do this. It should really be for everyone, even people who, like me, who are risk averse. So we really need to be more inclusive in our planning process. End of that. Next slide. We apologize for going over. I'm so sorry. We put in all sorts of extra slides because especially for Toronto. So we apologize, and we will answer any question. If you have to leave, we will answer questions by email if you want to email us. And you can also, if you're interested, buy a copy of the book. It's $30. So I think it's $40 actually in Canadian dollars. But all these details and many, many more are in the book, and we hope you do buy it. And thank you so very much for your patience. Well, I'm not sure if you've been patient. We've lost quite a few participants, but we hope we've been able to convey to you some really important information, some interesting illustrations of the main points of the book. Next. What is next, Ralph?
Thank you so much, John and Ralph. That was fabulous. And yeah, that was just wonderful. And we do still have quite a few people with us. And we have lots of great questions. So I'm not sure we'll get to them all, but we have about 7 minutes just to take us to 1:30. So let's do what we can. I have a bunch of my own, but I'm going to defer to the ones in the chat. So the first question that we have is, why is there such an increase in e-bike use in Germany compared to other areas? Do either of you know why that is?
Since Ralph is German, I'm going to let him answer that.
I don't have really a good answer for the why. I have a little bit of a hunch. I mean, there's some companies in Germany like Bosch, who does a lot of car parts, but they also do batteries for cars. And I was in Stuttgart maybe 12 years ago now, and they were already pushing building batteries and building motors for electric bikes. I was in Germany just 2 weeks ago, and it's just astounding how many e-bikes there are, especially in cities, and a lot of families using e-bikes with children, having these bikes with buckets in front of them or with trailers behind. It's just astonishing how fast the growth is. I think originally there were more e-bikes in the Netherlands, mainly for older individuals. There was sort of a little bit of a stigma attached even to the e-bike, sort of being a bike for older individuals. But even in the Netherlands, they have taken a turn, and they're now sort of the trendy and the cool thing to do. And there are some e-bikes now. I went to an e-bike store there that are really, some of them look, you still have to pedal, but they're designed like motorbikes, and they have themes. Like it's amazing what's available to sort of individualize these e-bikes. They're quite expensive, but there's a big increase there. But I don't have a good answer other than that some industries like
I do. I have a better answer, and I'm not even German, but I'm half Austrian. So all of these countries in Europe, I think North Americans have, and also Australians, have a false impression that there are no suburbs out there, and there's no suburbanization and decentralization in European cities. It's not true. I mean, I have lived in Germany almost for 4 years, and whether it's in the south or the north, there is a lot of suburbanization around these German cities. It tends to be more compact suburbanization. It's sort of clusters of development, but they are there's a lot of growth in these suburban areas. And that means they're farther away from many of the jobs that are in the center of the city, or the universities, or the best of the schools that the students need to get to. And so trip distances, especially to work, are indeed increasing in these European countries because there are people living in the suburbs. And so and this is why they're building these express bikeways, precisely because there are longer and longer trip distances. And then with these now express bikeways, having an e-bike is like a no-brainer. Well, then having an e-bike means you can ride faster, and covering that longer commute distance, which is evolving throughout these European countries, makes it a more and more feasible way to commute to work. Shame on you, Ralph, for not being able to answer that as a German.
I tried to answer the question why Germany is different from the other European countries, and most of the European countries have similar trends that you mentioned there.
We have a couple of questions, being in Canada, not too surprising, a couple of questions about winter cycling. If you have any suggestions around best practice, the best type of facility to use, and that kind of thing. Just if there's anything around particular, maybe even some safety considerations or some projects to foster year-round cycling. So that kind of idea. Anything you have come across in terms of winter cycling and making sure that people can cycle all year round when there's snow and cold.
I would suggest that folks there in Greater Toronto take a look at Montreal and Ottawa in Quebec City, because one of the times we gave this presentation, one of the bike planners for the city of Montreal, because that question was asked by one of the attendants on the webinar, and he answered it for us. He said they do it. I mean, it snows a lot more in Montreal and Quebec City and Ottawa than it does in Toronto, and it gets a lot colder. And they do. I mean, they have special equipment that keeps the bike lanes and bike paths free of the snow. And in Denmark and also in the Netherlands, but in Denmark, I think probably a little bit colder. There were certain cities in Denmark that actually make it a priority that they clear the bike lanes and bike paths before they clear the roadways. If only that were the policy in North America. It certainly doesn't happen here in the United States, but you can do it. I mean, if you decide you really want to encourage winter cycling, you can do it. And in Montreal and Quebec and Ottawa, which have very severe winters, they really do it. And I think also in one of the webinars, we had someone attending from Calgary. It also gets very cold there, and they deal with it as well. So it is possible. I mean, there are vehicles specifically designed for keeping the bikeways and bike lanes free of snow.
And there's an entire network and even conferences on winter cycling. I attended one once, it's now a while ago, in Finland, also very cold, very dark in the winter, and they have lots of tips and tricks sort of along the lines with what the question was, but I can't answer them specifically.
Yeah, that's thanks, Ralph, for that reminder. The Winter Cycling Congress, I believe it's called, and it's a fabulous conference. So just maybe just a couple more, if we can, maybe quick ones. So this is actually from a partner of ours in Markham, and she says that speed humps, bumps, pillows still can't get approval in York Region due to complaints that EMS, that's emergency services, will get delayed. Is there any research that we can use to promote them, since they're used so much in Europe? Any advice there around that?
My response would be those who oppose cycling facilities on that ground that they somehow would block or slow down EMS vehicles. I don't believe them. I don't believe those arguments for a second. There are EMS vehicles all over Europe, in every one of these cities that has vast networks of cycling facilities, traffic calm neighborhoods, artificial dead ends that prevent through traffic. And there's no problem at all in terms of the emergency services, as far as I know. I've never even once heard a complaint from the Netherlands or Denmark or Germany or Switzerland or Austria or any of these cities that have really, really good cycling facilities. None of them have a problem with accommodating EMS services. And so the excuse, and it really is a lame excuse that's used by officials in Markham. And I've been in Markham, and Markham politicians need to do a lot more than they're doing right now, that's for sure. And I mean, I wish the media and the public would just insist on it. It's really a matter of increasing the mobility for everyone there in Markham and giving everyone more mobility options. And this should be a matter of overall public interest, and the media should be behind the sustainability advocates there in Markham, and not come up with lame excuses for not being able to do anything. The issue of EMS vehicles is sort of a red herring. It's just an invalid excuse. And all you have to do is look at those cities with vast cycling networks, and there's absolutely no obstruction of EMS vehicles. It's a totally lame excuse. And I think the politicians or the officials in Markham who propose that as a reason for not improving cycling facilities should be fired, or at least not elected again. It's a message to Markham. Sorry.
I think I came across this in a slightly different context about lane width and sort of fire departments arguing that they need a certain lane width for their vehicles. But it turns out that in many places, not in the downtown places where you need the really long ladders, but in many, many places, you can have smaller vehicles. And the smaller vehicles then fit in the smaller lanes or through the narrower, the roadway narrowing. So one other thought about, and I don't know Markham at all, John seems to be the expert here, but I think that maybe working with traffic calming measures that are acceptable to them, even if it's a red herring, maybe instead of a speed hump or a bump, you do a narrowing where the EMS vehicle can still go through because everybody else has to go out of the way, but is not deflected up or down, but you still have a tight turning radius and you have a narrow passage. So maybe that could be a way forward, working with them if they stick to this argument, or you invite John to come by.
Yeah, I think the point is you can definitely technically accommodate EMS vehicles. Whatever you end up doing in terms of improving cycling conditions, you can in every instance accommodate those EMS vehicles.
I think we're going to need to leave it there. Thank you so much. You're both fantastic. I love your enthusiasm and just everything that you've done for this in the field to give us this evidence base is just so important. Can't thank you enough for the work that you're doing. So thank you so much. And thanks to everyone. Encourage you to buy the book. We're going to be sending you a follow-up link with the recording of this webinar. There's a bunch of questions that we haven't been able to get to. Hopefully, John and Ralph, you might be able to address those, and we can send a follow-up about those.
Yeah,
so
we'd be more than happy to answer any questions by email.
Awesome. Thank you so much to everyone. Really appreciate you coming today, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Keep pedaling.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.